hopefully share.
46 senators, 43 Democrats, and 3 Republicans.
Okay, everybody can see it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, well, this is the 6th and final lecture in our series on cities or countries that were important in Jewish history. And today we're going to look at Holland in the 17th century. And this is what historians have called the golden age of Holland. And so then the question first arises, why was Holland so important, so powerful, and so wealthy at this particular time? This is a picture of what one of the main streets in Amsterdam looked like in the 17th century. People are well-dressed. Many of these buildings that were constructed in the 17th century are still in Amsterdam, if you visited the city ever.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, here's another painting of what the canals and houses along the canals look like. And, people, royalty, who owned estates and whatever in Holland. Now, this is a map that I have. I have a collection of old maps. This is from 1606, and it's my oldest map, actually, and it is a hand-drawn picture of the Netherlands. Now, it's on its side, so that, if you rotate it to the left, it would look like a usual picture. But this is the Zuiderzee, the area of the Netherlands, which gradually was decreased and decreased, so they reclaimed the land. And here's the coast along the English Channel and all the rivers and whatever. Now, this is what Europe looked like in the middle of the 17th century. And, here's Holland. And one of the things to notice is how good a position Holland was in for trade. You could go across the Atlantic. You could make your way around Africa. You could trade into the Baltic. There was a big trade with Russia at this point for lumber and other furs and whatever. And you had good river connections into Europe. So when it rebelled against Spain, it was controlled by Spain until the middle of the 16th century, and threw off the Spanish and also threw out the Catholics, because Holland was a Protestant country, was dominated by Spain for a period of time, and there was a lot of antipathy towards the Catholics. And this was one of the reasons why they welcomed Jews from Spain and Portugal, because they were running from Catholic persecution. All right, now there had been a shipbuilding tradition in Holland for a very long time, and it was this expertise which pushed it onto the world stage. Now, about this history of shipbuilding went all the way back to the Viking times. A group called the Frisians, which is along the coast here, were very similar to the Vikings in terms of the use of boats and also raiding and whatever. So this tradition continued on no matter who controlled Holland. So by the, here's a picture of an artist's conception of the Frisians, and you can see how similar the boats are to Viking boats. Okay. So the building of ships was so advanced that when Peter the Great came to Europe and he wanted to study the technology of different areas, like he went to Germany to look at the creation of cannon. When he wanted to look at the creation of boats, he went to Holland. He went to Amsterdam, and he worked for months as a shipbuilder until he felt he had mastered it. So in a way, at this point, Holland even rivaled England in its building of ships, both in numbers and in quality. Here's a picture of Peter the Great, not a picture of the statue Peter the Great that's in, in Holland, but he also studied shipbuilding in England too. Now, what about the use of these boats? The use of these boats, in addition to protecting yourself from invasion, was in trade. And the first real trading company was the Dutch East India Company. All right, even though the Portuguese had, developed a trading network to India and China, the Dutch were the ones that first got a company together and took investment for trade, and they ended up dominating the trade in what's now Indonesia. The grade of pepper, nutmeg, and other spices was so high, the grade was so high that these products were worth more per pound than gold when they were brought back to Europe. Now you can imagine the difference between eating food essentially without much spice and then having pepper and other things brought in to change the taste of food. So it was very much sought after. Also, they extended their trade to China, silk, to Japan. They were, at one point, they were the only European country allowed to trade in Japan, as well as a trade in North America and South America. Remember that New York, or New Amsterdam, was a Dutch possession until the English took it over. And that was also, for a while, a very valuable for monetary trade in lumber and other kinds of furs. This is a close-up of some of the trade. They also captured the cinnamon trade from Ceylon. And today, it's still the best cinnamon is Ceylonese cinnamon, if you're a cinnamon advocate. We love it. All right, now we've established why Holland was successful and rich. Why was it important for Jews? Well, I already mentioned that at the end of the 15th century, when the Jews were kicked out of Spain and Portugal, they had basically three places to go. One was the Ottoman Empire, Turkish Empire. Two was Poland. At that time, the king of Poland was still welcoming Jews to develop their economy. And the third was Holland. So a lot of Sephardic Jews went to Holland, and especially to Amsterdam. Now, why were they successful? Well, one, the Iberian Jews were among the best educated people on the planet at that point. Remember the kind of education Jews got in Spain and Portugal, all the classics and astronomy and mathematics and whatever. Secondly, they were plugged into a trading network through the Mediterranean and into the Near East. And so those could essentially be continued after they moved to Holland. And remember that there was some opposition for Christians to travel in the Ottoman Empire at this point. There was a hostility between the Ottoman Empire and Europe, and battles going on and whatever with Suleiman the Magnificent. But Jews could go through the Ottoman Empire, stay at Jewish communities all the way into China. So this is extremely valuable trade contacts. And so as a result, Jews got rich. Many of them got rich. Now here's the modern view of the old main street of the Jewish section of Amsterdam. Even though you could live anywhere you wanted, Jews clustered in areas so as to make it easier to go to synagogue and whatever. This is an image of it in the 18th century. Now here is the main synagogue of Amsterdam, even though there were many, and it's a Sephardic building. Anybody ever visit there? Okay. So it's very well preserved. Here's a Sephardic arrangement in terms of where the bima is, and here the Torahs are kept here. Here's where the Torahs are, a close-up of where the Torahs are kept, and here's a detail of the silver breastplate on one of the Torahs. You know, here's a contemporary picture of what it looked like with people in the synagogue, and another one as well. And it was called the Portuguese synagogue. It was one among many. All right, so you have this picture of a country that's prospering, a Jewish community that's prospering, and relative freedom of religion. Other religious groups also went to Amsterdam, from places where they were being persecuted, such as the Huguenots in France, who were Protestants and who left France, and many of them went to Holland. Now, because of the wealth of Holland and Amsterdam in particular, artists did very well. And so I'm going to give you an example of an artist, Rembrandt, the most famous of this period, and how he was connected in ways to the Jewish community. Because he lived in the Jewish community, many of the people who were his clients were Jews. Now, this is actually a picture of the Rijksmuseum. Anybody been to the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam? Right. Well, it's great. And this is a show that was in 2019, which was the 350th anniversary of the death of Rembrandt. And they got all the best Rembrandts from all over the world. Museums just opened their doors, and I didn't get to go, but I mean, from what I read, it was just a fantastic show. Now, why is Rembrandt important? What did he do that was unique or made a contribution to the history of painting? Well, first of all, he was absolutely committed to realism, to the realistic portrayal of human beings. He was especially interested in emotion, and this was markedly different from most of the other artists of the time, who, first of all, often to please their patrons, made them look much nicer than they actually were in terms of their beauty. He wouldn't do that. So sometimes it got him in trouble where people, that before it became well known that if you get a Rembrandt, you're going to have to live with what you actually look like. People would return the pictures to him and say, I don't want this. I mean, this is horrible. Well, yeah, that's the way you look. Yeah, your nose is that big, that's it. And they said, no, we don't want it. So, Rembrandt would say, okay, fine, I'll keep it. You don't have to, but I'm not going to destroy it. So realism, emotion, and the use of light and texture. I mean, he's most famous for his use of light. And we'll get into these characteristics when we get into looking at his paintings. The other thing he did is he brought back, in a way, the popularity of biblical scenes. He was really, really interested in the Old Testament. He didn't do nearly as many paintings of the New Testament as he did the Old Testament. And so these became fashionable again to buy. All right, so let's see. Here's Jeremiah lamenting the destruction of Jerusalem, and this is an early Rembrandt. So let's look at the light. Where does the light hit in this painting? Anybody? What's the brightest? I can't hear you, Lynn. You're not on.
Muted, yeah.
What?
We were all muted. We couldn't
Okay,
hear.
there it is. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
the light is on his face.
Right, his face. So you can see obviously here that what he wants you to absorb is the emotions that Jeremiah is manifesting, how upset, crestfallen he is. And a lot of the rest of the painting is very dark. So this is called chiaroscuro, the use of light and shadow. And he sticks with this tool all through his painting career. Now, this is a painting of an elderly Jewish man in Amsterdam. We don't know what his name was. Again, his face is lit up, and to some degree, his hands as well. Now, every wrinkle is portrayed. This is absolutely, it's almost like a photograph. And I really like it a lot. I mean, I almost feel like I can sit and talk to this guy, you know. And what he has seen, what he has experienced in his life, I'd really like to be able to do that. And I think I feel that way about a lot of his paintings. This is a young Jewish fellow. He's got a kippah on. Again, his face is illuminated. Now, obviously, Rembrandt did not paint just Jews. You know, he painted everybody that wanted his services, and this is a wealthy Dutchman. Now, this is this is a Velázquez. It's called The Buffoon. So, you know, Rembrandt was not the only person to embrace realism during this period of time. Now, here's one of
he looks like a
Rembrandt.
dwarf. Is that guy? He looks like a dwarf. Is he?
Yeah. I don't know why they call it buffoon, but that's what the.
But he looks.
He's a dwarf.
Yeah, he looks dwarf-like.
He is. He's a dwarf.
Oh, okay.
All right. Now, here's one of the famous paintings. And this group, okay, were what's called the Musketeer Civil Militia. They functioned like firemen and police. And they at times were brought out to maintain order. It was an honor to serve. And again, this breaks with a frequent way of portraying a group where all of them could be seen. They'd all be lined up. That's not what, that did not interest Rembrandt. He took the most important people and put them in light, and then the rest were much more anonymous. Okay. Now, this is his wife, his beloved wife, Saskia. And, you know, he was crazy about her. And then when she died, he was just a broken man. But again, you know, he's not going out of his way to flatter her. You know, this is a woman of middle age, and that's the way he painted her. And you'll see later, that's the way he painted himself. I mean, he spared himself no. He didn't cut any breaks in terms of his visage through time. This is his son, Titus, who later, you know, died at a young age, unfortunately. Here's another famous painting of a guild of fabric makers. Now, here is a Jewish couple just getting married. All right. And art historians talk about this being a reference to Isaac and Rebecca, but these are real people who commissioned this this painting. And one of the things they mentioned is the way that the clothing is depicted. He used a very heavy texture, very thick paint, and then much more delicately on the hands and on the face, but very thick in here. Apparently another method that that he employed. Now, when Vincent van Gogh saw the painting in 1885, he said that I should be happy to give 10 years of my life if I could go on sitting in front of this picture for 10 days with only a crust of bread. So obviously he was a fan, big fan. Here's a detail, the heavy texture, the light.
Look at the jewelry, how the jewelry is picked out.
Yeah,
With like, yeah.
Whoops.
looks heavy.
Plus there's like spots of very, very light paint.
Yeah,
You see, you get the shine and glitter, the appearance of it. Don't forget, this is just paint.
right,
He evoked the textures brilliantly.
right. He was also very interested in science, and Holland was one of the few places that allowed dissection at this time. So here's a famous anatomist, and people would come and buy tickets to actually see a autopsy. It wasn't just for medical students. The average person was interested as well. Now, this is the street upon which Rembrandt lived. His house, which is now a museum. Here's the front door of his house in Amsterdam. And it's very well preserved, including his art collection, what he collected. All right, so he lived there between 1639 and 1658. And here's the antechamber on your way to his bedroom. This is his cabinet of curiosities. He would collect things that he was interested in painting, or just things that he felt were strange. That's an armadillo, which, as far as I know, only lives in North and South America. Is not a product of anywhere else. This is his painting studio. He also had a printing press that he made lithographs. This is the kitchen, and this is the maid's bed. So he was doing pretty well. It's pretty nice layout. Although later in life he spent too much money and got into some difficulty. There's his bed with Saskia, wife. All right, so this is his art collection, what he bought, and the only paintings of his own were there's his printing press, were self-portraits, which I want to get to.
David, could you scroll slower? I mean, now we're caught up, but for a while there, because it takes a while to get to us, you're talking about the next thing.
Oh,
And so it's just that the scans take a while to get to us.
is there anything you want me to go back to?
Well,
No? Okay.
they flash by.
All right.
Let me see his kitchen. I would like to see his kitchen.
All right. Looks pretty inviting, doesn't it?
I don't see it yet. See, that's the problem. It takes a minute to get to us.
Oh,
don't see
no,
it?
I saw it immediately.
There it is. Okay.
It's
Yeah,
your computer.
Yeah. Okay. Got it.
Sorry about that. All right, so here is Rembrandt as an old man. 1647.
That's
After
not
the-
the,
yeah.
that's not the title. So are you sure that's him? It says Old Man with a Beard by Rembrandt.
Well, I think this is a section of self-portraits, but maybe I'm wrong here. I collected self-portraits.
Oh,
Here's
this one I know.
he's
Yeah.
young. I mean, that is just horrible.
Oh, look at that one.
I mean, oh my God. He and his wife. This is famous.
Mm.
So he portraying himself as the Apostle Paul. Just look at that face. Oh man.
A bubble.
Look at all the wrinkles in his brow. This is, his latter years were not nearly as happy without his wife. All right, so let's get to a Jewish person who is famous at this point, and that is Spinoza, who lived from 1632 to 1677. Now, Spinoza came from a Sephardic family. His grandfather had come from Portugal in the late 15th century. He was schooled in typical Orthodox education, studied Talmud, was considered to be a genius at Jewish studies, and was expected to become a great rabbi. Then in his late teens and early 20s, he read Descartes, which had a major influence on his life. So what did Descartes say? He says, you cannot trust anything right off the bat as true. In other words, no writing, nobody else's opinion, nothing, okay? That you must use reason and perception in order to gain the truth and gain religious truth. And, he said you don't have to rely on the biblical text. So that was a radical idea, and it had a major impact on Spinoza. Now, it turns out that Descartes ultimately comes to agree with most of the things in the Bible. He says that, question everything, but he came to the conclusion ultimately that he could prove or use reason to back up what was in the Bible. Spinoza did not come to that conclusion. So Spinoza was concerned about the nature of God and the relationship between man and God. And he felt, using Descartes' example, that reason had to be the way to answer the questions about God and man. And he felt that God was everything, that you could not separate anything from God, and that we essentially then, our souls, were a manifestation or a part of God. And so that raised issues like, well, what about evil? If everything is God, is evil part of God? These kinds of questions started to alarm the Jewish community. Now, he wrote nothing prior to his excommunication, but he spoke and taught. And this idea that you could just throw out the Bible, not use it as any kind of given or revealed knowledge, was something that was terribly threatening, not only to the Jewish community, but what they were even more worried about was the reaction of the Christians. They had a recent, so to speak, experience of being expelled from a country. They did not want to be expelled from Holland. And so the idea that the Bible could be just tossed aside and that you could just use your own reason, this was not a popular idea among the Christians. And Spinoza was approached and saying, look, please stop saying these things. No, that he wasn't going to stop. They said, look, we'll pay you to stop. We'll give you a stipend, a yearly stipend, just for you to be quiet. And he said, no. Now you can imagine what kings, then there was still a king in Holland, and there was still aristocracy in Holland at this point, even though it was a republic, what they thought of this idea that, you know, God was not intervening in our lives. I mean, if we are, you know, the whole idea of kingship is that the divine right of kings. Kings are essentially our link with the divine. Well, if there is no action between God and man in that kind of way, then what's the point of a king? What's the point of royalty? What's their legitimacy? So you can see why non-Jews would be just as threatened by his writing as others. So ultimately, there was an assassination attempt. Some authors say who tried to kill him is unclear, but then the Jewish community excommunicated him. And that was a very rare thing to have happened ever in the history of Judaism, to excommunicate a member of a Jewish synagogue. And we still have the letter of excommunication. And it is really a very scary kind of document. They're supposed to curse him day and night. They can't get any closer to him than 6 feet. I mean, it's really just a horrendous thing. It just shows you how frightened they were about him. This took place when he was 23 years old. Very young man. Here's a painting of him at age 33. And this is a sculpture that's in a Russian museum, done at the time. And this is a depiction of his being shunned by the Jewish community. This was painted in 1907. So what did he do? Well, he left Amsterdam and he went to The Hague, another city in Holland. And his friends, who were philosophers and whatever, some of whom were wealthy, they offered him money to try to keep him going. And he said no, he wasn't going to accept that. And he became a grinder of lenses. So this was a time where telescopes and microscopes and all the rest were being perfected. And his work was to grind the lenses as a way of making money, and then he would write in his free time. Now, unfortunately for him, if you don't wear a mask while you grind glass, it ends up being breathed into your lungs, and that's what killed him at a young age. Here's his library in The Hague. Now, Spinoza is a celebrated Dutch person. I mean, the modern Dutch people look back on their history, and he's a very important philosopher who ends up greatly influencing philosophy after the 17th century. Here's his house in The Hague, a house in which he died in 1677 at the age of, he was 40 something. Here's another statue, age 45. Okay. And here's a statue of him in Amsterdam. Another view. I don't know why he has birds on him. All right, let's look at some quotes from Spinoza just to give you a flavor for any questions up to now before we move to his quotes. No questions. I call him free who led solely by reason. Most people parade their own ideas as God's word, mainly to compel others to think like them under religious pretext. Everyone should be allowed freedom of judgment and the right to interpret the basic tenets of their faith as they think fit. Now, our founding fathers read Spinoza. You know, they were rationalists, and they were worried that there would not be freedom of religion. Part of that had been what went on in England with the Church of England. But just, you know, because of other cultures' experience with state religion, and they absolutely wanted to prevent that from happening. A miracle, either contrary to nature or above nature, is mere absurdity. Now you can see why that would upset a religious Jew. No miracles. Now, Maimonides talked about that to some degree, but he would rationalize some miracles as possible and others as not. And Spinoza allowed very few that he felt were reasonable. The mind of God is all the mentality that is scattered over space and time. The diffused consciousness of that animates the world. He felt that our souls were part of God, and that he was interested in trying to define what is a soul of people. A thing does not cease to be true because it is not accepted by many. That's almost a direct quote from Maimonides, if you remember. He said the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Don't cry and don't rage, understand. I like that. Don't cry, don't rage, understand. The endeavor to understand is the first and only basis of virtue. Reason is no match for passion. This is the problem. This is the human problem, that if you want to get people to put aside their reason, get them emotional, get them upset, get them fearful, and they'll take reason and throw it right out the window. The supreme mystery of despotism is its prop and stay is to keep men in a state of deception with the specious title of religion to cloak the fear by which they must be held in check so that they will fight for their servitude. I love that. They will fight for their servitude as if for salvation. The big lie.
Yeah.
When all decisions are made by a few people who have only themselves to please, freedom and the common good are lost. Now, just imagine if you were a king, how you'd respond to that. When all decisions are made by a few people who have only themselves to please, freedom and the common good are lost. Ignorance of true causes makes for total confusion. Hatred is increased by being reciprocated and can, on the other hand, be destroyed by love. Again, that's almost a paraphrasing of Maimonides. Now, Spinoza was a fan, by the way, of Maimonides. He just felt that Maimonides didn't have the courage to keep going with his line of rationality. And that's probably true. You know, it would have been a death sentence for Maimonides during his age, and in a way, it was a death sentence for Spinoza. Ended up, you know, shortening his life. All right. Let's see what else we want to do here. He was very opposed to greed and felt that it was immoral, that there were people that were hungry and didn't have shelter and food and whatever. The wise are richest by nobly despising riches instead of greedily pursuing them. And he walked the walk and talked the talk. When he was excommunicated and his father died, his sister petitioned that he be cut out of the will because he was excommunicated and was no longer a Jew. So Spinoza took her to court and he won. And then he said, but you can keep it all now. In other words, that's not why I objected. I objected because you're not fair and you're wrong, you're unjust. If the money means so much to you, well, then you keep it. All right, let's see what else we're going to do here. Blah, blah, blah.
Was that one of his quotes, blah, blah, blah?
Yeah, it is.
That's a famous quote.
He really tried to keep that one secret, and I think that he succeeded. Oh, okay. The bottom, superstition is founded on ignorance.
Yeah.
Now, the last person that we will consider is Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. Now, he's actually in the beginning of the 18th century, but I included him for several reasons. One, because he illustrates the fact that Jews who were persecuted went to Holland, not just because they were persecuted by Christians, but because they were persecuted by Jews also. And Chaim Luzzatto, Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, was an Italian Kabbalist who was kicked out of Italy, and he ended up going to Amsterdam, where his beliefs didn't so much shake up the Jewish community in Amsterdam. They were more liberal than those in Italy. The other reason why he's important is that he was one of the fathers of the Musar movement. Anybody know anything about the Musar movement? No? Okay, well, I know Lynn does because she's really quite adept at explaining this. So I think if you have questions after I'm done, you can direct them to her. Essentially, well, all right, let me just say why he was kicked out of Italy. There was a false messiah in the 17th century named
Sabotage.
What?
Sabbatai Tzvi.
What?
Sabbatai Tzvi.
Sabbatai Tzvi, yeah, I was blocking his name. Sabbatai Tzvi, who lived in Israel in the Ottoman Empire, became many people, thousands of people, and then hundreds of thousands of people became convinced that he was the Messiah. And he heard voices. Actually, one of his acolytes convinced him that he wasn't mentally ill, which he probably was, but he was truly the Messiah, and that the voices did come from God. Anyway, it created a horrendous situation in Europe and in the Near East, where Jews sold everything they owned and went to Israel because they felt the Messiah had come, and then got totally disillusioned when the Messianic age did not come about. So Jews became very worried about anybody who said that they heard the voice of God. And Luzzatto claimed that he did. And now, the thing is, there's a difference between a pseudo hallucination and a true hallucination. And there weren't psychiatrists in this time period to try and tease them out. A true hallucination, you hear through your ears, and you could locate it outside of you. Okay, that's a true hallucination.
Off the stage.
What?
Didn't say one word. I told you, they're all screaming.
Gigi, mute yourself.
Honey,
Thank you.
What? I'm sorry. What happened there?
Somebody else was talking in the room with Gigi
Oh,
and
okay.
muted themselves.
All right, so a pseudo hallucination is a voice inside your head where you don't hear it through your ears. Now, that's a very common experience. Now, if I had to guess, I would guess that Sabbatai Tzvi had true hallucinations because the chances that he was bipolar are very high. And I'll bet you that Luzzatto didn't, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he did hear voices. But the fact is that as soon as that got around in Italy, they wanted him out of there. And that's when he had to flee. And he decided not to teach when he was in Amsterdam, but to just write. And he wrote his most famous work, The Path of the Upright, it's called, while he was in Amsterdam. Okay. Now, what is Musar? Musar is a path of contemplative practices and exercises that have evolved over the past 1,000 years to help an individual soul to pinpoint and then to break through barriers that surround and obstruct the flow of the inner light, the soul in our lives, so that we basically have good and wonderful impulses within us, but they're hidden sometimes or blocked. And the idea that Musar is going to open up those channels, so to speak. Now,
That sounds very much like Kabbalah.
yeah, I mean, there were Kabbalistic influences. The difference here is that the Musar movement gives you a practical way of uncovering your good impulses behaviorally. I mean, it's really like behavioral psychology. And they use text study, meditation, silence and retreat, diary, chanting, contemplation, visualization, and also study with a partner. You know, let's say you're working on patience. Well, you diary, write down what's happened in the last week in terms of this, what's called midot, which is a characteristic. And you then meet and talk about in a very open way what's happened. Where did you fall down? Where did you succeed? What do you need to redouble? So it's a behavioral intervention. And in the modern form, here's Luzzatto's book. And in the modern form, the books that describe the Musar method will go through various midot: equanimity, honor, simplicity, enthusiasm, silence, generosity, et cetera, and then look at Jewish writings to talk about it, and also to what barriers there are to trying to gain more of balance in these midot. So, Luzzatto was not the final, by any means, contributor to Musar. It's continued to this day, but he was important in its evolution. Here is his tomb, also in Tiberias, right near where Maimonides is buried. Lynn, do you want to say anything about Musar?
Only if people have questions.
Okay. Anybody have any questions about Musar?
There's a lot of practical ways that have been set up to to guide study, and particular texts to review when you're working on one of the character traits or midot. So it's it has a long history going back about 1,000 years of text talking about values and character traits and how to integrate them into your life. Goes back to, if anybody's heard of him, Rabbi Bachya Ibn Pakuda. Has anybody heard of him? So that was a book written around late 11th century, before Maimonides and stuff, pretty early. And then there were various writings that appeared throughout the ages, additional texts. But one thing you didn't say is that this culminated in the 19th century with an actual formal movement where there was like a curriculum set up in the yeshivot in Western Europe, particularly in Lithuania. At least three main yeshivot, and the leader of that movement in the 19th century was Rabbi Israel Salanter, or Rabbi Israel of Salant. Salant is a place. So if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Yeah. In our synagogue, Lynn has led a group of people studying Musar, and Lynn herself has been working on this philosophy and behavioral tool, and meeting with a Musar partner once a week. So she's really steeped in the use of Musar and understanding it. So
It just sounds so much like Kabbalah with the Sephirot. I mean, they're different attributes. And if you count the Omer with the Sephirot, you're really trying to do the same thing, and you do it with a partner to get to your true inner self, to see who you are. And the whole point is, well, I'm going to say the lightning strike, but, you know, to, I can't remember the term, where we better ourselves. I mean, there's a Jewish term for
Eshbon hanefesh.
Thank you. And so even though the particular attributes of the midot are different, in a way that the methodology and the concepts are very much like going through the Sephirot in Kabbalah. So, I mean, I could see that the two could work very well together.
Well, Ramchal was a Kabbalist,
Huh?
but there's the strains of Musar began well before Kabbalah.
That was gonna, I thought of that question and then I forgot to ask it, which came first, you know, so, but.
So I think one difference here is the fact that there's really behavioral measures that are well articulated about how you, I mean, it's one thing to point out that we ought to have more enthusiasm or more equanimity. The question is how. And I think what Musar's done, my understanding, which goes beyond Kabbalah, is to actually give you tools, specific tools on how to do this. Is that right, Lynn?
There's it's like a curriculum set up that's
Right.
more elaborate. So whereas the midot that were studied like in Kabbalah were related to the sphirot, chesed and gevura and so on. The midot in Musar are well expanded beyond those original 7.
Okay.
Yeah, well, it's very much expanded.
All right, well, if there are there any other questions? We're going to wrap it up if there are none. Okay, well, thank you for your attention. And I will look forward to seeing you in person in November. And I wish you all Happy New Year in advance.